Thank you very much for coming. I'm quite honored to be speaking to you today because, as Hagen said, I'm a new member of Safrea, but I've been a journalist all my life, at least all my life that I've been earning a living. Today I make most of my living from market research, but I actually spend most of my time writing, and that's part of the travails that we face as freelance journalists, is that writing doesn't actually make you a good living. So a lot of us are in fact earning two livings or following two careers, and my main career is in market research, but my best career and my most enjoyable career is in writing the various columns and freelance features for various publications. But what always strikes me about journalists, and freelance journalists in particular, is that while they are the medium for keeping the public informed, they themselves tend to be the least informed on new developments in their environment. And I refer specifically to technology and social media. I find journalists are the most technophobic category of society almost. Both in the use of the technology itself and the platforms that keep emerging as a result of the technology, so social media in particular, and areas like Twitter and Facebook. I've been dazzled by the level of sharing that happens in the email forum with Safrea, but what's also amazed me is how many people still argue against using social media as part of their media presence and as part of their journalistic identity. It is such a powerful environment to leverage what you do, but also to learn more about the areas in which you are writing. So I thought I'll combine those kind of thoughts into this presentation, but also give you a very personal experience in what a new social media platform has done for me and what I've learned from it and what I believe that freelancers can learn from it as well. And I chose Instagram because it is relatively new as a platform for expression and for media dissemination of material. And we think of it as a photographic medium primarily. It is, and a lot of photographers are in fact now making a living through exposing themselves via Instagram. One example that comes to mind is Gareth Pon. Have any of you worked with Gareth Pon, or do you know his work? He has something like 250,000 followers on Instagram, and the consequence of that, along with the quality of the material he produces, the consequence is that he is non-stop flying around the world on assignments from clients who pay him the highest imaginable rates and give him these incredible experiences around the world, in which he also interacts with other Instagram, let's call them stars for the moment, because the leading lights of Instagram like to congregate together, but also at a broader level, the Instagram community itself likes to congregate as well. A lot like the freelance journalists, the Instagrammers, or Igers as they call themselves, are a similar kind of community. They're very supportive of each other, and they love socializing, which gives the lie to the idea that when you get more involved in social media, you become less social. It's actually not true. The more actively involved you get, the more social you become, the bigger your circle of friends, and the broader the opportunities to interact in the real world, face-to-face with people. And it makes it quite an exhilarating environment in which to play. So I'm going to give you a small little microcosm of that experience in the context of exploring an area of journalism. And I'm talking about photography largely, but it also applies to researching any topic or any area that you want to write about, or that you get really interested in, or even and especially passionate about. So first, to give you the big picture with Instagram. Right now, globally, at the end of last year, 300 million people were active on Instagram, 300 million active every month. It's not as big as Facebook, which is now 1.5 billion. It's not as big as WhatsApp, which is 1 billion. And it's not quite as big as Twitter, which is 400 million. But Twitter was at 300 million about 3 or 4 years ago, and Instagram is growing a lot faster than Twitter. So Instagram is likely to overtake Twitter. It already is regarded as having reached a critical mass of users. When it overtakes Twitter, then people are going to take it even more seriously. In South Africa, in 2013, there were 680,000 people. And the reason it was so low was that until the beginning of that year, you had to have an iPhone to use Instagram. It was the only platform on which Instagram was available. Then it opened up to Android, and within a few months, it shot up to 680,000 users in South Africa. A year later, it had gone up to 1.1 million, already one of the fastest growing social networks in South Africa. And if people thought, well, that's just because it came off a low base, the following year, last year, it grew 133% to 2.68 million users. So it's growing exponentially in this country. It's massive. And part of the reason is that it's available on almost every smartphone that you can get. And it gives people the opportunity to do something with those numerous photos that they're collecting on their smartphones, which previously tended to just reside on that phone. And often when you upgraded your phone and you accidentally factory reset the old one, you lost all your photos. Instagram gives you a platform and a gallery to show your photos to the world. And who knows, someone spots a great photo and gives you an assignment based on that photo. That's what's actually happened to many IGers or Instagram users. But the epiphany for me came a few months ago when I was going on a trip to an IT expo in Berlin. I was going on to an IT expo in Berlin and then to an IT conference in Tel Aviv. And Berlin is known as one of the world capitals of street art. And my daughter, who is 17, and is getting very into countercultures and subcultures and the like, asked me to please take photos of street art in Berlin. She would like some photos for herself, but she also wants to see what it looks like in reality as opposed to just the photoshopped images or the professional images that she's seen online. So in Berlin, unfortunately, the routes that I followed, the places I went, there wasn't much street art to be seen. And what I did see was very mediocre. So I forgot all about it. Then I arrived in Tel Aviv, and the area in which the conference was being held is a kind of rundown but newly gentrified area. So parts of it still very rundown, parts of it gentrified. And in between, there's a tension between the artistic and creative community on the one side and developers on the other. So the artists are trying to claim space and create works that will live even temporarily to brighten up the more rundown parts, while the developers are trying to mow down everything in their path at the same time. So it's a kind of situation that you see anywhere in the world where a rundown area starts being revived. Street art there is sort of interregnum between those two phases. And I took this photo. And I thought that's quite beautiful. Excuse me. The Band-Aid there, the typography that was being used, and then the message itself, your tears are like mine. I thought it was such a poignant summary of how a lot of people in Israel feel about what's happening there. Everyone is suffering. It's not one group suffering is worse than the other, is what that message was saying. So a kind of universal message of humanity. And I simply posted that. And my caption was this: poignant graffiti, never tzedek. That's the name of the neighborhood in Tel Aviv. If you want to see amazing street art, but also that fascinating juxtaposition between the rundown and the new, that's the neighborhood to go to. Think Melville, I guess. I got 20 likes, which at the time wasn't bad because I had maybe 100 followers. I was posting once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks, maybe once a month. And then there was a comment by a user, which was a very straightforward comment, but I saw it as almost a smackdown, saying, you didn't do your homework. He just said, hashtag Dede Band-Aid. And I thought, what on earth is that? So I searched hashtag Dede Band-Aid and discovered that it was a street artist by the name of Dede who uses the hashtag Dede Band-Aid, and every single one of his works of art has got a Band-Aid in it, just to show you that.
You didn't even notice it at the time?
I didn't even notice that. And that was actually his signature.
Yes.
So that made me realize that street art isn't just street art to be captured and posted without any acknowledgement of its origin. As a journalist, it's something that we should know, because we ourselves are so, I won't say even precious, but aware of the concept of ownership of what we create and how little respect there is for that ownership in the broader environment. And this guy was simply saying, respect the owner. This is who it is. So I contacted the guy who sent me that message, and I said, do you mean that's the artist? And he said, yes, you can recognize him by the Band-Aid. And I said, and what about this other piece of work, for example? He said, yes, that's another artist. And I realized that this guy, and I looked at his profile as well, he identifies every single piece of street art by the artist. And occasionally, he doesn't have the artist or can't find out who the artist is, and he asks people to please tag the image with the artist's name if they know who it is. So then came the next picture. Well, firstly, I realized I've got to do my homework. And this was just down the road, also in Tel Aviv. It's the most dazzling building you can imagine. And you can see it from different angles, you see different pictures out of it. That looks like a 3D cutout. And in fact, it's just part of the wall. And I thought this at least will be easy to find out who the artist is. And it took me an entire afternoon to track it down, because you find a picture of it everywhere, but everyone just said the graffiti house or graffiti wall in Tel Aviv. No one had any respect for the artist, despite how much artistry went into this. So I was determined that I would track it down. And it's strange that it took so long, because it's not an unknown guy. So this is my caption. That's the street name, 11 Hayarkon Street. Faces of Tel Aviv is actually the name of the wall given by the artist Rami Meiri. So I credited it to him with a hashtag. He didn't have a Instagram profile, so I didn't use @Rami Meiri. And then I discovered that he is not just well known in Tel Aviv, he has global renown. And in fact, he had been to South Africa just 4 months earlier as a guest of the Pretoria or the Tshwane municipality to create street art in Pretoria. And it made me suddenly realize that there's a lot more to the street art than I imagined. These artists are actually real artists, and they have real credibility, and they have real recognition around the world. But I couldn't get more information than that, because even though they brought him out here, they didn't make a big deal of it. No one knew about it. No one had written about it. No journalist had picked up on the fact that this brilliant street artist was in Pretoria. I haven't seen a single image of a piece of work that he's created in Pretoria. So that's a story waiting for me or for one of you to be written. And with only 200 followers, I had 96 likes. I'd never seen a reaction like that before, proportionately speaking. You could almost say 50% engagement with my followers, which is exceptionally high in the world of social media. And the comments that came with it, the previous one had no comments except for that little smackdown.
But of course, sorry, that was probably the hashtag, so you're in fact engaging with people who weren't
Yes.
followers.
Correct, that too.
Yeah.
That too. But usually there's a relationship, so I'm just going to shut down this phone. There's a relationship between your number of followers and the proportion of likes that you tend to get. Power off, there we go. So, but these comments were what really inspired me, because I had a stream of comments at the bottom of my description. And sick, by the way, is a compliment. It's for those who aren't aware, kids use the word sick to say fantastic or great or amazing. And then I came back to South Africa after that very brief but real enlightening experience. And the very first day, or the first full day back in South Africa, driving down a street near Louis Botha Avenue in Norwood, I suddenly see a graffiti wall, or rather, now prior to that I thought of it as graffiti. I suddenly now knew that this was street art. A wall with a sequence of street art images on it, including this one. Don't know if you've seen that. Rusty. If you just drive past it and you're not paying attention, you just think someone has painted pictures on the wall, big deal. But when you look at it, you realize this is amazing art, and there's a lot to it. There's a lot of elements to it. Look at this is a pencil with angel wings on it, and a halo. And the halo and the angel wings are actually a tribute to another street artist who had passed away. And somewhere in the work, you actually see the credit to it. And there's a whole language to street art which is invisible to the viewer. Until you've actually been informed or guided or instructed in it, you don't see it. Like you wouldn't think of the angel wings and the halo as being that, or as being a tribute, or what it relates to. And that alone starts telling you something about the street art community. It's a very tight-knit community that continually shares and pays tribute to each other. So what's very common in street art is what they call a shout-out. Not quite a shout-out like you have in the media, but in street art, a shout-out is when they include someone's name in a piece of art. And a lot of people mistake those names for the artist signing it, but in fact it's the artist giving a shout-out to someone that they respect in the street art community. So this then took me a few days, literally a few full days of research to figure out what that art was doing there, where it's from, who was involved. There were about a dozen artists who took part in a Paint That Wall Day, something along those lines, in 2014. And every panel is a fantastic work of art. So I began posting those onto Instagram and then sharing them on Facebook. And this was over a period of about 4 or 5 days. Every day I shared 2 of these images on Instagram and 1 on Facebook. And it had a massive reaction. People couldn't believe that this kind of art was simply out there in the open on the walls of average Johannesburg suburbs. But then something even more amazing happened. Well, firstly, I just want to quickly pay tribute to the artist. Rusty Nails is his name. He's at the core of a vibrant street art community in Johannesburg and in South Africa. And the huge coincidence is that an event called the City of Gold Urban Art Festival, anyone here heard of that? One person, 2 has heard of it. It's pretty much unknown to the general public. It was due to kick off a week later, and people started telling me about it via Facebook and Instagram and inviting me to it. And one of my Instagram friends happened to be with Nissan, which was one of the sponsors of the City of Gold Festival, and she put me in touch with the organizers of the festival. Literally with a couple of days left to go before the opening of the festival, and I was invited to attend the media opening, which included a tour of the street art of Braamfontein. Again, when you drive through Braamfontein, you just barely notice that on some walls there happens to be art on the walls. And in fact, it's an open-air exhibition with some of the world's great street artists represented there. And I found myself inside a secret society. Because firstly, on arriving at the venue where the tour was going to leave from, where the launch was going to essentially start, I spot this on a wall. That's a piece of work by Rusty, and it's next to the studio from which he works and from which Montana cans or Montana spray paint. It's the brand of spray paint that all the street artists use. They have their shop there as well next to this. But notice this wall here. This is the poignant part of the picture. They were busy building a new office right next to the building in which Rusty worked, and that was about to cover up this beautiful piece of work. So had I come a week later, I wouldn't have seen this. Had I come a week earlier, I'd have got the full picture. But I was privileged to be able to capture this literally in the moments before it was going to disappear forever. So it encapsulated for me the impermanence of street art and the need for it to be captured and the opportunity to capture amazing work for anyone in photography or freelance journalism or videography as well. Very little videography has been done around street art, by the way. There's maybe 2 or 3 documentaries available in total on street art in South Africa. So then as part of the tour, they point this out to us. Now, to most people, it just looks like a poster that's been put up there, a banner, a mural. No one thinks of it as street art. It turns out that the year before, for the Street Art Festival, it's an annual event, they brought out the artist by the name of Obey to create this giant mural, the biggest mural of Nelson Mandela anywhere in the world. Well, not mural, it's a piece of street art. And he chose that theme, the purple shall govern, from the legendary event in Cape Town where police used purple spray paint to spray the crowds, and someone jumped onto the water cannon tank and turned the hose around and sprayed the police. And after that, the graffiti appeared somewhere, the purple shall govern. And this inspired Obey tremendously. Now, Obey is more than just a legend. His real name is Shepherd Fairey. Does anyone know what Shepherd Fairey is most famous for? Anyone?
Wow.
That's Shepherd Fairey's art. He created the iconic Obama image, which has now been copied for not just numerous other politicians or leaders around the world, but also for individuals to hopify their own images. So you can get your own image to look like that as well. Created by Shepherd Fairey. He's in South Africa for the City of Gold Urban Art Festival, and no one knows it. And he creates that piece of work, our equivalent almost of the Obama Hope image, and no one knows it. And it just shows that once you enter these kind of subcultures, you start learning information that is so astonishing and yet so unknown that it opens massive opportunities to write about, to photograph, to document in whatever way you work. And then onto the 2015 version. So you start realizing when that emerges out of the previous year's event that this year's event is also going to produce some a street corner in Jeppystown. This building is called Pinky's Place, and it's a spaza shop. And prior to this artwork, it was a completely run-down building from which Pinky sold odds and ends, and I think that's Pinky's daughter looking out there. It was an amazing moment while photographing him at work for her to peep out. It's one of my all-time favorite photos. Equally significantly, the gentleman painting there is a guy by the name of Rexo. So let me just move on to this. His name is Rexo. His Instagram handle is Rexo Lohant. And he worked on that wall with Mike Love, who's a local street artist, Zesta. Zesta's Instagram handle is Zesta Own Crew, and Solo, who's an international artist as well, an American, also brought out for this festival and creating amazing work. I could show you all their work, but there's just so much of it. I just want to show you what Zesta produced just around the corner from there. So what you saw a moment ago is Rexo working over there, and this was Zesta's work. That sequence of images was the beginning of a relationship with several of the street artists who are connected with via Instagram and then via Facebook. More significantly than that was this experience. So the artist's name is Above. He's on a par with Obey, in other words, Shepherd Ferry in international terms. When Above comes to town, everyone wants to see what he produces, but no one's allowed to photograph him if his face is going to be shown. So that's why the photo doesn't actually show Above. That's him there. This is a, what do they call it, a cherry picker that he used to create that piece of work. It's the largest mural he's ever created. So in his world, this is a legendary piece of street art.
Where is that?
This is also in JP's Town. It's just around the corner from where the others were taken.
Maboneng type area.
Sorry?
Is that Maboneng?
Not far from Maboneng. It's in walking distance from Maboneng. But it's just off Jewel Street.
Are they always done with spray paint?
It's, no. Spray paint is the most common, and it's sort of almost the icon of street art, the iconic tool of street art rather. But a lot of them use stencils, and a lot of them use what they call paste ups. So they create the work in their studio, and then they use a specific kind of glue to paste it on a wall. And very often the black and white stuff that you see is paste up material. But Above, as I say, is the street art Michelangelo of giant murals. So an enormous privilege to have him also producing work in Johannesburg and to actually see him in action. The finished work, this wasn't my photo, it was a guy by the name of Kale Wadoko. That's the completed work. Kale Wadoko, by the way, has produced a book of South African street art. So after I started posting all this stuff on Facebook, one person after another said, when are you going to do a book on this? And I kept telling them, there is a book on this. And so far, out of that, only 2 books have actually been sold from people wanting a book on it. So people want the stuff, but they don't actually want to work for it. They don't want to spend money on it. They just want it delivered to them. So it's not easy to take an area like this and turn it into a living. You've got to do it as a passion. And that's what Kale Wadoko did as well. He hasn't made money out of the book, but it's his great passion. He and another guy by the name of Derek Smith, who's also known as Mr. Baggins, are the kind of doyens of street art documenting in South Africa. And they'll share information with anybody who wants it. They'll identify the artists. If you find a piece of art that you don't know who created it, they'll put you in touch with the artists, etc. It's an incredibly sharing and giving community once you're inside it. And that was the key. In just 3 weeks, from my Instagram faux pas in Tel Aviv to rubbing shoulders with the rock stars, not just of local street art, but global street art. It was incredible. It was more than an epiphany. It was a life-changing experience. And just along the way, my Instagram following shot up in just that 3-month period. But more important than the following was learning about credibility in covering a particular area and becoming a specialist in that area. So I don't regard myself as an expert, but certainly a specialist because I'm specializing in sharing street art. And you won't believe what happened next. So what had happened in Braamfontein is that they gave a street art tour guided by a street artist, one of the street artists themselves, by the name of Bias. And why Bias chose to do the tour was because, unlike many street artists, he didn't mind his face being shown. A lot of street artists want to remain anonymous. They don't want their faces known because they often work in areas where it's illegal. And a lot of the street art they put up is illegal. And just to put that in context, the city of Johannesburg is very street art friendly. And that's why you're seeing so much street art around the city. And if you open your eyes to it, that is, and if you're aware of it, you suddenly realize that Johannesburg has become one of the street art capitals of the world. I'm not aware of any city where so much street art is being created on a regular basis. Going to West Dean, for example, drive around West Dean. It's just astonishing what's happened there just in the last few months. A project that began because someone saw a piece of street art that Derek Smith had posted, Mr. Baggins, and said he'd love to have some of that in West Dean. And one thing led to another, and a project began to bring all the street artists into West End. Anyone who had a wall available was given the opportunity to have street art put up on their wall. So it's become a gallery of street art. And throughout Johannesburg, every now and then you come across a wall where there's a sequence of panels of fantastic art. But what happened next is I was with my daughter in a car coming back from somewhere. One Saturday, I think it was, could have been a Sunday, and I suddenly see crossing the road in front of us, this is in approaching Victory Park where I live, crossing the street is a very familiar looking shape and face, and he's carrying a big can that looks like a paint can. And I say to her, "That's Bias." And she said, "Who's Bias?" I said, "That's the street artist who gave us the tour," because I'd filled her in on all the experiences I'd had. And she said, "You're kidding?" And I said, "Yeah. He's obviously going somewhere to paint on a wall." And she said, "Can we find him? Can we go look for him?" So we were on a sort of main road, so we parked the car inside Victory Park, and we figured that he must be going into the Braamfontein-Spruit because there was a bridge. The road we were on crosses a tunnel that carries the Braamfontein-Spruit under that highway. Actually what happened was we went home and we fetched our cameras, and then we went looking for where he might be. And coming in under the tunnel, that's what we see. That's Bias. And Bias remembered me, and he had a fellow street artist with him who he was helping show the ropes, and he was also painting the walls here. And I introduced Bias to my daughter, and she was starstruck. Her dad knows a great street artist. So that was actually what was one of the great rewards for me, was her respect for my street cred, so to speak. This is the summary. It's the tunnel under Rustenburg Road, just next to the Virgin Active. Yes, exactly. Now, if you stop your car and you go under the tunnel, you'll see a dazzling display of street art.
On the way to Greenside?
Yes, correct. And this is a key learning for me. I've been going to Braamfontein and Jeppiestown to find these street artists at work, and it was right there in my neighborhood. And the more I inquired, the more I discovered how much is in my neighborhood. So in Greenside itself, for example, on Barrios Avenue, just before you get to Glen Eagles, that main strip of coffee shops and restaurants, there's a wall with about 12 panels of street art.
It's next door to my house.
Yeah.
Really? Oh wow, cool.
I was chatting to the guys while they were doing it. I didn't
Yeah.
realize it was such a significant thing.
That's quite amazing. Now you know. So literally the story is not just in your neighborhood, it's your neighbors. And in Delta Park as well, we discovered that this, one of the same guys who was behind that wall in Greenside is Zester. I showed you his work earlier. He and his girlfriend, who's also a great street artist, her name is Paige, they painted a wall in Delta Park on one of the walls of a house that's got the back on Delta Park. And I discovered that wall as well subsequently in my explorations. But what happened in particular between Bias and Zester is Bias told me that he's also done this work in Greenside, or that Zester had done the work in Greenside, but that he and Zester had collaborated on a wall in Rosebank. And I should go look at that wall. And you've probably all driven past it, but probably not noticed it. And this is how the wall starts. It's opposite the Everard Reed Gallery, and they were in fact commissioned to create it for the 100th birthday of the gallery. Bias and Zester had a fallout subsequently, apparently, and they won't work together. But someone told me that they probably won't tell you about the work because of their fallout. But once I contacted them, it wasn't an issue. So people perceive these fallouts to be major splits, but in fact, these guys are quite chilled about it. But that's on the corner, that's where the wall starts. But this is where it ends. And that's an image of the Everard Reed Gallery,
Yeah.
surrounded by aliens, monsters, dinosaur bones, and the like. And it's an example of the incredible collaboration you get between the street artists when they work together. And you'll often see that you have individual panels that are clearly by one artist, but then you'll have a kind of mashup of art. That's a collaboration between artists, which also gives you a sense of the richness of that whole community. It's not like the regular art community where artists work in isolation. So that was the, you could say that the high point of my interaction with the street art community. Becoming friends with these guys, becoming Facebook friends with them. And on Facebook, Zesta in particular was incredibly helpful, telling me exactly when and why and how they did each piece of art. The piece of art in Delta Park, for example, I sent him the image, I asked him who all worked on that. And he said, myself and Paige, but quite coincidentally, we've just been back, and you see that blemish, there was one big blemish on the piece of work, we've just fixed that up. And I went for a run a few days later to go, and didn't have my camera with me, but I ran past that to see and discovered that they'd done another couple of walls alongside. Mm-hmm. So it had all expanded and keeps expanding and keeps growing. So it's an amazing environment to explore. But then it went beyond street art. A month later, I was on holiday in Stellenbosch. It sounds weird, but it's actually an idyllic place to go on holiday, outside of varsity terms, and discovered a different kind of street art there. There's a massive public art exhibition throughout the town of Stellenbosch. And yes, you get public art throughout the world in cities, but here it's a curated exhibition where they've brought in artists and they've commissioned them to do works of art. And most of it is well labeled and well explained. So for example, this piece of work, it's called Outside Looking In. And alongside it is this, it's not quite a poster, it's like a plaque. Some of it is on walls, some of it is on street poles, etc. But all of it is well explained, well documented, well labeled. So it's a curated exhibition that happens to be in the streets of Stellenbosch. Except for this. In Mill Street in Stellenbosch, I see above a wall, I see that sequence of metal sculptures. And your first reaction is it's just decoration on the building. But then you look closer and you realize there's more to it than that. There's actually social commentary happening here. Clown playing piano, someone else holding up another clown while the music is playing. It's almost the band played on while society collapsed. And if you look at these images as well, you start getting a sense of it being political commentary. In front there, leading the pack, is someone with a sign that says no dogs allowed. Who does that remind you of? Jacob Zuma, who said that people who own dogs are actually racist. So it's a whole commentary on almost the collapse of rationality in South African politics. And if you go through those sequences, you start picking up those little things. And I realized that this wasn't just decoration. It was a law firm's building, Kluwer Marcotta. So I assumed they had commissioned it. But even that didn't just look like commissioned art. It looked like real artworks. So I phoned Kluwer Marcotta and they said, no, they've got no idea. It was just put there. I must phone the Open Stellenbosch sculpture project, something along those lines. So I did a Google search on that, found it, phoned them, and they said no, they didn't do that one. They did all the sculptures in the public art exhibition, but I must phone the Stellenbosch tourist office for that. So I phoned the tourist office, and there, luckily, they were very helpful. And no one there knew offhand who it was, but they could find out for me. And I emailed them my details, and the next day I got an answer back telling me who the artist was and how I can get hold of the artist as well. But for me, the important thing was just to be able to identify the artist and credit him before I start posting on Instagram. And this is the artist, Jaco Sieberhagen. And it was actually an exhibition that he had created called The Carnival, and in brackets, No Dogs Allowed, with very deep social commentary behind each of those images. So had I not had that background in researching the artists behind street art, I wouldn't have thought of trying to find out what was behind these metal sculptures. I would have taken them for decorations. Most of us do take all of these for decorations. But I then found him on Facebook, asked him to be a friend, and he immediately friended me. I then asked him about the exhibition, and he sent me a long description of what his thinking was and where I can find more information, etc. So that is one of my Instagram posts. You can see these clowns are in fact bashing down ordinary individuals. So the clowns are government functionaries keeping the citizenry suppressed while being pulled along by a porcupine, a very prickly character. It's called a prickly pear. And it's a very subtle commentary on the politics of our times. It's part of a Stellenbosch Outdoor Sculpture Trust initiative to make art accessible in public spaces. And that in itself is a story that hasn't really been told. I found an article about it, but only one article, and not really crediting the artist to the extent that they would. Once you search on Jaco Sieberhagen, you can find all the information on him. You can find his site, you can find his exhibitions, etc. But there's a disconnect between that kind of information and what you see on the streets. And part of our job as writers, photographers, videographers is to close that disconnect and make the connection for the public in what's happening in their environments, whether it's art or whether it's activity in the environment. And again, a string of comments as well from people from around the world. So the Instagram followers it's a global community who are fascinated by this kind of thing. This was a key lesson to me. Merely thinking for Instagram, in other words, how are you going to present something that you see on Instagram, opened your eyes to new stories, new communities, new possibilities for what you can cover, write about, and photograph. And then some key lessons out of this for not just journalists or photographers, but for almost anybody exploring social media or exploring the environment. Understand the dynamics of the environment you want to explore. So you want to do a story on street artists. Don't just go write an article about the cool street art. Find out what's behind it, who is behind it, what their story is, and what the peculiarities of that community are. So I see quite a bit of coverage these days of the street artists, but I see it in isolation of the broader environment. What I see is there's cool work coming up around Johannesburg, and here are some of the artists who are doing it. And yet each of those artists tend to have a story behind them, how they got into it, why they do it, and what it means to them, and what they're trying to put across. Sometimes it's social, sometimes, not very often, it's political. Normally they're responding to something in their own environment or in their own lives. But the missing ingredient usually is the broader environment, that in fact there's a different street art culture and politics in Johannesburg than in Cape Town, for example. So I mentioned earlier how friendly Joburg is to street art. What I didn't mention is how unfriendly Cape Town is to street art. So the Cape Town city authorities have in fact banned street art, which is incredibly short-sighted. This supposedly visionary city council lacks serious vision in areas like this. The only area where you'll see significant street art is Woodstock, because that came in before they banned it, firstly, and secondly, it has been seen as uplifting the environment, beautifying the environment, and it's been accepted there. So Woodstock is sort of an enclave of street art in Cape Town. You can actually do a street art tour of Woodstock when you're in Cape Town. I highly recommend that. I still haven't seen anyone writing a good story about it, so the stories are all available. That's the amazing thing about street art. And in Pretoria, as I mentioned earlier, they actually brought out a street artist. But Johannesburg is definitely the street art capital of South Africa, probably Africa, and possibly the Southern Hemisphere. Although I've seen amazing work being produced in Melbourne, for example. So maybe we compete with Melbourne. But further abroad, we're also bringing out these great international names in street art, like Shepard Fairey, for example. Why did no one know he's here? To me, it boggles my mind. So the big picture is completely missing from any coverage that I've seen from of local art, aside from people within the community writing about, for example, the City of Gold Festival. Number two, you never stop doing your homework. And this applies to any area of freelance journalism or of journalism. The more homework you do, the better the stories you're going to get. Someone said yesterday in the forum, in the Safrea forum, that they're going to Namibia. Can anyone suggest stories for them? Now, that is a good starting point, getting people to suggest stories. But if you go into a place, then do your homework on that place. Research it, find out what's happening, what's the latest news. Call up the local newspaper online. There's no excuse anymore not to access local information, local news on the places that you're about to visit. Do that homework and it'll repay you in spades. And then once you get into that community, engage with the community, become almost part of the community. And some of the best journalism is produced when people become part of the environment that they're covering. When I talk about journalism, I'm talking about photography and videography as well. The more you embed yourself in the story, the better the story, the richer the story that you're going to come out with. And then listen to advice, but use common sense. Now, this is not something that you'll usually get in tips on freelancing or writing. But what I've found is that a lot of people were giving me advice on how I should use Instagram, how I should share on Facebook, what's the best way to share to get maximum attention. And I listened to some of their advice, but very often I discovered that it was from people like Gareth Pond, for example, who had 250,000 followers. He doesn't have to stimulate attention. He doesn't have to get people to come look at his stuff because he has this massive community that comes looking anyway and comes sharing. You and I still have to draw attention to our work. We need to not just post it, but also post it with hashtags that will bring people to it because they're searching on that hashtag. Or we have to share it in other media like Twitter or Facebook and say, come and see this that I posted on Instagram. Obviously using more sophisticated language than that. But the point is we have to use whatever means are at our disposal and not just take the bog standard advice that you'll find by Googling what's the best way to get attention on Instagram. And you'll get a guy who who probably has 500,000 followers and is very glib about what to do. So you've also got to do what works for you. The advice you must take, though, is on what not to do. There's a lot of advice on what not to do. And most of that advice is good advice because people make fools of themselves by not following that advice. I won't go into detail there. You can Google that one. And this, in social media, as a creator of material or a discoverer of material, the most important thing you can do is share that material. Had I not been sharing the images that I was finding, I would never have been introduced to this environment. Care about the material. That's even more important. And that care I'm talking about not just identifying the artist, but curating the material, turning it into a post of not just an image with a credit, but also an image with a story. So every Instagram image can come with a story. Instagram doesn't have the same limit that Twitter has on 140 characters. They do have a limit, I'm not sure what it is. On hashtags, they have a limit of 30 hashtags, but the amount of text you can put with a picture is quite extensive, and every picture can be a story. Yes, I know a picture tells a story, but you can also tell a story that tells a story of the picture. And I highly recommend that on Instagram, not just have a one-line caption, except where it feels right. But generally speaking, the more of a story you tell, the more of a service you are actually providing for your reader, but also for whoever you're covering in this environment. And then dare, take chances. Don't feel that, who am I to intrude on that particular community? That's what I would have felt if somebody initially had said to me, why don't you go and photograph the street artists at work? I'd have been very reticent. I would have been quite shy to do it, because my attitude would have been, they're not going to accept someone like me who looks nothing like any of them in their environment. And in fact, once you engage with them, they don't care. They don't care what each of their colleagues looks like. Why would they care what a journalist looks like, or a photographer who comes to meet them? But that's just one example of daring. By dare, I really mean that you should take chances with the areas you cover, the way you cover it, who you engage with, and where you go. Don't take chances that are dangerous, but take chances with your image, with your experiences, and with what you're going to cover. And the biggest prize of all to me, and I don't have an image to illustrate this, I'll just share the thought with you, is that I have a teenage daughter who thinks I'm cool. Thank you.